when loan officer Christine Brown doesn't let an old lady have more time to pay back her loan. The lady puts a curse called the Lamia on Christine. Now, Christine's life becomes a scary nightmare. Hey there, welcome back to Popcorn and Summaries. Today, I'm going to explain a horror film called Drag Me to Hell that was released in 2009. But before we jump into the details, make sure to show us some love by liking the video, leaving a comment, and of course, subscribe to the channel if you like the video. Now, let's get right into it. Back in 1969 in Pasadena, a young and upset couple takes their son to see a medium named Sean Sandina. The boy has been hearing strange voices for 3 days, convinced that someone is chasing him. It turns out he took a silver necklace from a gypsy wagon, but even after returning it, the voices persist. Sandina tries to save him with a ritual, but it's too late. Shadows come to take the boy. An unseen force pushes the adults away, and the boy disappears into the depths of hell. Sandina vows to meet the devil again and redeem herself. In present-day Pasadena, Christine Brown works as a loan officer at a bank. Eager for a promotion to assistant manager, she faces skepticism from her boss, Mr. Jim Jacks. He sends her on an early lunch break, leaving her feeling down. Christine visits her boyfriend, Clay Dalton, a psychology professor, but his wealthy mother disapproves of their relationship. Back at work, Christine encounters Mrs. Sylvia Ganish, seeking an extension on her mortgage. Despite Mrs. Ganish's desperate pleas, Christine, determined to prove herself, rejects the appeal and calls security. After handling the situation, Mr. Jacks is impressed, giving Christine a chance with an important client and assuring her about the promotion. Later that night, Christine, alone in a dark parking lot, senses paranoia. As she hurries to her car, she spots a vehicle resembling Mrs. Ganish's. Terrified, she rushes inside her car, and as Christine turns to face her backseat, Mrs. Ganish appears and grabs her head. Christine lets out a scream while trying to break free. Desperately, she grabs a stapler from her box and slams it into the woman's face repeatedly. Panicking, she steps on the gas, causing the car to run backward and collide with another vehicle. This impact forces the woman to loosen her grip momentarily. Despite the struggle, the woman wraps her arms around Christine's neck, strangling her. In a risky move, Christine shifts the gear forward and accelerates once more. Anticipating another attack, Christine pulls down her seatbelt, intentionally crashing the car into another parked vehicle. This sends Mrs. Ganish flying forward, knocking her dentures out. Undeterred, the old woman attempts to bite Christine with her toothless gums, but Christine fights back, pushing her away and using a ruler to defend herself. Eventually, Christine manages to kick Mrs. Ganish out of the car and locks the door. Undeterred, Mrs. Ganish grabs a brick and drags Christine out of the car. As Christine prepares for another assault, the old woman seizes one of Christine's coat buttons. With a sinister smile, Mrs. Ganish whispers into the button, invoking a force named Lamia. Returning the button to Christine, she cryptically predicts that Christine will soon come begging. Christine loses consciousness, only to wake up later with Mrs. Ganish gone. Terrified, she contacts the police and her boyfriend, Clay, who rescues her from the scene. They decide to visit a fortune teller named Jas, hoping for some answers. During the session, Jas senses a curse upon Christine and hastily refunds them, urging them to leave. Back home, Christine, still haunted by the day's events, crumples an old photo of herself, attempting to distance herself from her past. Strange occurrences intensify, with the wind causing havoc and shadows taking the form of a horned figure. In a moment of calm, Christine hears a sound at the door and discovers it wide open. She tries to secure the house, but the wind's eerie presence lingers. Later that night, Christine and Clay plan a weekend trip to his parents' cabin. However, as Christine settles in for the night, she experiences a horrifying nightmare involving Mrs. Ganish's decaying corpse, maggots, and a terrifying struggle. Waking up in a panic, she realizes it was just a dream, but is left feeling unsettled by the ordeal. Clay drives Christine to work, but she's still stressed from the previous day's events. Feeling an unusual shift in the universe, she becomes paranoid, seeing Mrs. Ganish's traces everywhere. Impatient with her colleague Stu, she suddenly experiences a strange episode. Blood drips from her nose, and she vomits onto her boss, Mr. Jacks. Horrified, she rushes out, unaware that Stu has stolen her client documents. Christine seeks out Mrs. Ganish's granddaughter, Alenka, hoping to apologize and make amends. Alenka dismisses her, but leads her to a bizarre funeral ceremony in the basement. Christine stumbles upon Mrs. Ganish's corpse, realizing she's dead. Alenka, unsympathetic, warns Christine of impending consequences. Christine, now haunted by Mrs. Ganish's vengeful spirit, consults Ram Jas, discovering she's hunted by a Lamia, summoned by gypsies for evil deeds. The Lamia torments its victims for 3 days before taking the cursed object and the victim's soul. Christine realizes her accursed object is a coat button. Ram Jas advises appeasing the Lamia with a sacrifice, giving her a book with instructions. Back home, Christine feels Lamia's presence, seeing shadows and a devilish figure. Terrified, she locks herself in her bedroom, attempting to call Clay. A picture of Mrs. Ganish appears on her phone, and Lamia's hands reach out, trying to take her soul to hell. Christine escapes, running upstairs, but Lamia bursts in, tossing her around like a doll. Determined to end the curse, Christine sacrifices their cat. When Clay arrives, she insists on going to his parents' dinner. At the Daltons' villa, Mrs. Dalton interrogates Christine about her troubled past on a farm. Despite Mrs. Dalton's initial snobbery, she is impressed by Christine's honesty, and they share a light moment. During dinner, Christine finds an eyeball in her cake, stabbing it to release blood. She coughs up a fly, horrifying Mrs. Dalton. Christine, fed up, throws a glass at the door, screaming for Lamia to leave her alone, leaving Mr. and Mrs. Dalton bewildered. Christine, angry at Ram Jas for the cat's sacrifice, learns she needs $10,000 to seek help from someone who can rid her of the Lamia curse. Desperate, she attempts to secure an advance at work, only to discover her promotion has been delayed. Feeling defeated, she sells belongings and is tormented by hallucinations of Mrs. Ganish. Clay, caring for Christine, reveals he already paid Ram Jas and supports her journey. They visit a mansion with Ram Jas, where they meet an older Sean Sandina and her assistant Milos. Sandina believes Christine's plight, sharing the story of a boy cursed by Lamia. In a grand room with a scenes table, Sandina prepares a ritual involving a goat to trap Lamia. During the seance, unsettling spirits appear, and Lamia takes control of Sandina, transferring to Milos. The ritual goes awry, and Lamia targets Christine. Ram Jas and Sandina struggle to banish Lamia, resulting in Sandina's death. Ram Jas informs Christine that the only way to escape Lamia is to pass the cursed object to someone else. They place the accursed button in an envelope, urging her to dispose of it by morning. Christine lies to Clay, claiming the ordeal is over, but on the way home, she encounters Mrs. Ganish's ghost on the road. The files, including the envelope with the button, fall, signifying the weight of her decision. Christine faces the dilemma of passing the curse or facing dire consequences. Deciding to meet Clay later, Christine searches for a recipient at a diner. Unable to find a suitable living person, she calls Stu, blackmailing him to come or risk exposure for stealing client documents. Stu arrives, begging her not to reveal his actions. Despite her initial plan, Christine empathizes with him, asks him to leave, and turns to Ram Jas for guidance. He suggests giving the accursed object to a deceased person, offering a potential way out for Christine. Christine, determined to break free from the curse, heads to the cemetery with a shovel. The same handkerchief that haunted her in the past takes on the form of Mrs. Ganish, attempting to suffocate her as she drives. Christine stops the car, tears the cloth apart, and proceeds to dig up Mrs. Ganish's corpse. In the cemetery, Christine opens Mrs. Ganish's mouth and formally declares the transfer of the accursed button back to the old woman. As rain fills the hole, Christine struggles to escape. The corpse floats around, dragging her into the water, and a falling cross hits her head. In a miraculous turn, Christine emerges from the water, using the cross to pull herself out. By morning, Christine, feeling liberated, returns home, believing she's finally free from the gypsy's curse. Packing her bags for a trip, she receives a call from Mr. Jacks, learning she got the promotion as Stu was exposed for insider information. Heading to the station to meet Clay, Christine decides to buy a new coat for the trip. Unbeknownst to her, Clay waits with an engagement ring, intending to propose. When they finally meet, Christine expresses gratitude for Clay's unwavering support. Clay asks about her old coat, but she claims to have thrown it away. As they prepare to leave, Clay presents an envelope containing the curse button. Shockingly, Christine realizes she mistakenly gave Mrs. Ganish the rare coin meant for Clay. Gasping, she backs away, falling onto the train tracks. Despite Clay's desperate attempts to help, a train speeds over, creating a hole beneath Christine. Burned hands pull her down to the depths of hell, leaving Clay in disbelief as the new owner of the curse button.